we have in the Bible this mention of Leviathan, the god of the sea and rivers. And this Leviathan, this seven-headed serpent, has been around from the beginning as well. In fact, it is equivalent of what we see in the book of Revelation, the same symbol. It represents Satan. Well, let's look what it says here. The Leviathan, as mentioned in the Bible, is a huge seven-headed serpent that lurks in the depths of the sea, who was also the giant serpent god in Canaanite mythology. Oh, wow. Canaanite mythology, and then we have a seven-headed serpent god. That's interesting. You mean all the way back then? Not only is that true, but he was a serpent god in Canaanite mythology whose battle with the storm god brought about the great flood which wiped out all life on the earth. And if you go to the Canaanite religion and their stories and their mythology, that's exactly what you'll find. Is they say the seven-headed dragon monster-like creature caused the flood and the destruction of the earth. All that's saying to me is that same seven-headed dragon in Revelation chapter 12 is the one who caused the flood. Yes, God brought the flood, but why? Because Satan destroyed everything that he could. And God did make a way out. That's why the Spirit moved me to say about Noah, when Noah stood on the earth, and there were only 8 of them, other people could have come in. They just chose not to. They chose to ignore the warning. Unfortunately, I think most of the world, and a lot of the people in the Christian church, are just not heeding the time. Anyway, according to the book of Job is in your Bible. It's not some apocryphal writing. A lot of people never read the book of Job. It's pretty a lot of substance to it. There's a lot of chapters. Over 40 chapters, I believe. According to the book of Job, the Leviathan monster is a giant sea creature wrapped in scales of armor, its back protected by tight rows of shields, its chest hard as a rock. No sword, spear, or arrow can penetrate the outer coat of this great serpent. Even more dreadful, the massive Leviathan dragon is strong, so strong it can churn the sea into whirlpools. Do I believe that this creature actually exists? Yes, I do. I don't understand everything, but I believe this creature actually exists. Job is speaking literally when he describes this thing. He's not thinking, symbolically here. If you read this, in fact, there's a lot about Leviathan throughout the Bible and the seven-headed dragon. Now, you'll see the seven-headed dragon is not limited to the Bible or to the Canaanite theology. Here we have an interesting statue here. You'll see this right here is the Buddha. So in Buddhism, they have this seven-headed serpent as well. And you'll find out that, I believe in Hinduism, you'll see that seven-headed serpent as well. And if you look at other mythology as well, you'll find the seven-headed serpent. In fact, Hercules, I think, fought the seven-headed serpent. So you see this all through the world's religion. Well, where did it come from? This statue here, by the way, this Buddhist statue with the seven-headed serpent is there in Thailand. If you ever get there, make sure you find out where it is so you can get yourself a picture of it. Doesn't that look like something you want to look at right before you go to sleep at night? Man, I don't want to. But and then there's a picture on the right as well. That kind of looks like something I don't want to come into contact with either. But all of these pictures I think would be helpful is if you can, when you think of Satan out there, don't think of him as just something we talk about. Literally, he's out there. And God doesn't say he has 7 heads. Unless he has 7 heads. There's some connection there with the 7 heads. Now, I've taught, and I still believe what I've taught is that those 7 heads represented the same thing. We have the 7 titans. I believe that there's 7, there's like 7 heads to this thing called Satan. And one of those heads, in the mythology, only one of the heads was immortal. Like one of the heads was in charge. And so, but the seven shared, the same identity. I don't understand the whole thing, obviously, and I don't know that anybody does. But Satan is not somebody walking around in a Halloween suit with a little red tail, and a pitchfork. He's more representative of what we see here. And it's kind of terrifying. Anyway, the eyes of the huge monster in the sea glow like the rays of dawn. Its mouth is ringed in fearsome teeth. The scary sea creature is the proudest of all proud creatures. 7 heads on 7 powerful necks rear their ugly heads above water, snarling and gloating through bright, sinister eyes. Job declares that the 7-headed serpent of Canaanite mythology actually breathed fire. So that's where we get the idea that this dragon, the 7-headed dragon called Satan, actually can breathe fire as well, because Job actually declares it. We said all that really to get into Joshua. Remember I told you that we were going to talk about the book of Joshua, its relationship to Bible prophecy. The reason is because one of the first things I realized way back when I first read the book of Revelation, after I had read the book of Joshua, I realized there was a connection. The Holy Spirit just said, hey, there's a connection. I believe that that's the way God speaks to us many times. He just says, you just know there's a connection. And the reason God is doing that, what He's saying is, take some time and look into this. But usually we don't have the time, and by the time we do have the time, we forgot that God got our attention. Because God will only tell us once, maybe twice, and then He'll just leave us alone. He's like, you're not interested. But anyway, I want to go through this because I believe that God has shown me some things here that kind of give us some understanding, a greater revelation of how the 7 trumpets in chapter 8 through 11 actually fit in the whole scheme of things. And it's hidden here in the book of Joshua. So Joshua chapter 3, verses 3 through 5. You see here of course, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant. What they're doing, the people are behind them following, because they're crossing over the Jordan River, right? That's what this story is about. They're going into the land of promise. Moses couldn't take them into the promised land, but Joshua is taking them into the promised land. And what goes in front of them is the Ark of the Covenant first. The people must follow. They must allow the Ark to go first. They commanded the people, saying, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the priests, the Levites bearing it, you shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way heretofore. And Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. To me, the one thing that comes out from jumps out from those scriptures, for all of our lives, the Holy Spirit is reminding us, let the Lord go first, because you haven't been this way before. Whatever's going on in your life, you haven't been here before. It may be similar, but you have not been in this situation before. But here's something that speaks volumes to me. You notice what's highlighted here. There shall be a space between you and the ark about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it. So you're supposed to follow the ark. Let the ark go first. But what's the space of 2,000 cubits? And the Spirit of God quickened to me one time. And I don't know how many times I read that before I got what the Spirit of God wanted me to get out of that. But I realized it's been just about 2,000 years since Jesus Christ was on this earth. And the Ark of the Covenant represents Jesus. And Jesus is equivalent to Joshua in this book. Joshua is leading them into the promised land, into the land of their inheritance. Jesus is leading us as the church into our inheritance. And he said, now let there be about 2,000 cubits space between you. Well, what's a cubit? I don't know. I mean, I know a cubit is, from your finger to your elbow, and everybody's cubit is a different size. But really, what is a cubit? That's like asking somebody, what is a millimeter? Nobody knows, because we deal in inches, right? But when we think of it like this, let there be 2,000 things of measurement between you. All of a sudden you can see, wait a minute, he's talking about Jesus will go first, and about 2,000 after that, increments after that, you'll be following. And what I believe he's saying to us, the Spirit is saying, he's saying, there's going to be about 2,000 years between when Jesus goes through and leads the way and when you're coming, filling in the back. And I think that's, to me, I just want to scream and holler and praise God, because you know what? That brings us right about to the time that we're in. About 2,000 years. We're not quite there, because Jesus was, 33 and a half years old when he died? And when was he born? Well, if the calendar was right, then 0 AD, or 1 AD, right? He'd have to come in 1 AD. Well, we know the calendars are screwed up, so we don't know exactly. But we're certainly not there. If you add 2,000 years to 33, that would bring us to 2033. We're pretty doggone close. Right? With everything else going on, do you think the 2,000, if you add it to the 33 when he died, is pretty doggone close? I think so, and I'm encouraged by that. But let's go on, because this is only the beginning. Let's see what else we got from Joshua. Okay, so here we see the picture on the left and the top. You can see the ark being carried by the priests. You can see they have the 7 trumpets that you can see Jericho in the background. And Jericho is only going to fall if they do what God says to do. There's an instructional manual, if you will, that God gives them. God gives to Joshua, and Joshua then conveys, this is what God says to do. If we're going to have this city collapse, we have to do what God says. Now, thankfully, those people in that day listened to their leader. People today, it's hard for them to listen to what the leader says. Joshua, you can see the Hebrew up there, it says Yeshua. Yeshua. Joshua and Yeshua is Jesus. And Joshua is only a variant of the word Jesus. Joshua basically has the name Jesus on that book in the Old Testament. The first 5 books that went before were the Pentateuch, written by Moses. Moses brought the law, the knowledge of the law, but Moses couldn't bring them into the promised land. They had to wait for the one who's called Joshua, for the one who would lead them into the promised land. Anyway, you got the Ark of the Covenant in the background. You got the 7 trumpets. Here on the bottom, you can see the walls crumbling, just like Joshua said. As long as they were obedient, and they were obedient, those walls of Jericho fell. And this city, the first thing they come against with the city of Jericho, there's no way they could have taken it in their own power. There's no way. If they wouldn't have listened, there's no way they would have taken it. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see the 12 tribes, how Joshua divided up the land. Remember, Joshua has been sent to bring them into the promised land and give them their inheritance. And then we have another scripture where Joshua meets the captain of the Lord's host, which the first time I read this, I was kind of amazed at this story here. It's actually quite, Joshua has some really fascinating things in that book. It's really, if you haven't read it, you need to read this. It's a really good book. But Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho See, what he was doing, we were reading it was by Jericho, he was assessing the situation. He's a spiritual leader, and not only spirit, but he's a military leader, a strategic leader, right? So Joshua was by Jericho. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, Art thou for us or for our adversaries? And this man replies, he said, Nay. Are you for us or for our adversaries? Nay. No. Or neither. But then he adds, he said, But as captain of the host of the Lord I am now come. In other words, I don't care about you, and I don't care about him. I'm standing here to do what God's called me to do. Wow, if we would have that attitude, right? I don't care about you, and I don't care about them. I'm here to do what God's called me to do. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped him. Wait a minute. Thou shalt not worship anyone that's not God. Right? They did worship. Remember, they fell down. They tried to fall down before in when different angels appeared, and the angel rebuked them. You don't worship me. But here he worshipped him and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And this individual says, The captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, from the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. What does that remind us of? Moses. Yes, exactly. Moses was in front of a burning bush. Joshua was standing there face to face with God. It's got to be God because he's worshiping. He says the same thing. Loose your shoes. This is a holy place. God has appeared to Joshua face to face in a revelation in a way that Moses never got. And doesn't that sound like the way Jesus has come to us in the New Testament? He came to reveal the true God. And he came in a way that he could bring forth that revelation. All the time, he said to his disciples, he said, they said, show us the Father. Remember that? Show us the Father. He said, haven't I been with you all this time? You still don't know who I am? It was the Father. Inside Jesus, inside that body was God. He was as much God as the Creator. In fact, he was the Creator. He's as much God as the Jehovah of the Old Testament. In fact, he was Jehovah of the Old Testament. Sometimes we get that sidetracked. But here, Joshua has some experience that you don't see people having in the Scripture. This is an amazing book. He says he's the captain of the hosts of the Lord. In other words, I'm the captain of the armies. I'm in charge of all the armies. I do the battle for the Lord. And I do what the God says and tells me to do. And why is he here? He's here to tell Joshua, here's the plan. Here's the battle plan. And that's what Jesus did. He came, if you could use this as an illustration, the captain of the hosts of the Lord has come to appear to us and has said, here's the battle plan. It's the 27 books in the New Testament. That's the battle plan he gave us. And we can't get the people to read the plan. But it's the plan, whether people read it or not. They say, so many people out there think they don't need it. I have something to do that's more important than the Word of God. You can always find something to do. And obviously, things are going to come up, and there's occasions where you got to address certain things. But it's an attitude in your life. It's an attitude that you have concerning the things of God. So we're talking about Joshua's conquest and its relationship to Bible prophecy. And here's something interesting. We saw how the seven-headed dragon has always been from the beginning. We saw how seven-headed dragon was very prominent in the Canaanite theology. We saw seven-headed dragon has the horns, 10 horns on its head, right? But look at this. Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. He reveals that when it talks to prophecy and having to do with the Antichrist kingdom and that which is coming in the future and that which we will have to oppose, it will look something or resemble something like what we have here on the picture on the left-hand side here. And so Daniel says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong, exceedingly, and great iron teeth, devoured and brake in pieces, stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now we know there's 3 other beasts he talked about. We know that this has to do with prophecies of the end time. But what I want you to see is that this parallel existed in the book of Joshua as well. The first revelation of this actually comes out. Look in Genesis chapter 15, verse 18 through 21. Now what that scripture is, remember when Abraham is making covenant with God, or God's making covenant with Abraham, he says, I'm going to give you this land. And look what he says to him. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. And then he talks about the inhabitants. Look how many there are. Count them. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephims, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. How many are there? There's 10. So in the time of Abraham in Canaan, there were basically 10 horns on the beast. God was saying, I'm going to bring your seed to possess this land, and I'm going to kick this beast out of here. And he's telling them that right now there's 10 strong kingdoms there. So, Daniel gives us a revelation later on of how this seems like it permeates the Scripture and permeates prophecies, and I never would have expected to see this in the book of Joshua. But it's there. It's a beast having 10 original horns. Well, actually, this is in Genesis. And Daniel also tells us that when we have the 10 original horns, he also speaks prophetically. He says 3 of the original horns are going to be uprooted. In Daniel 7, 8, you can see the 3 horns that are being uprooted. And the reason they're uprooted is to allow for the horn to come up among them, who we know later on speaks of the Antichrist, right? Did you know there was a type of Antichrist in the book of Joshua? And not only were there 10 horns or kingdoms, but when Joshua goes in there, 3 have already been uprooted, leaving 7, just like Daniel says. I think that's more than a coincidence. Daniel 7:1, or Deuteronomy 7:1 says, and this is before Joshua, the Lord says, when the Lord thy God, actually Moses is speaking, when the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, has cast out many nations before thee. You can number them. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. I thought there were 10. Well, now there's 7. And we know that the same 7 was exactly what Moses said, because at the end of Joshua writes in his book, and you went over Jordan, he's speaking to the Israelites, reminding them, they came to Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you, the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I delivered them into your hand. And so you can see, you don't really see it's almost like it's hidden, but remember, Jesus said whatever's hidden is going to be revealed. And, it's obvious the parallel between these 7 kingdoms and the rising up of the Antichrist. And you can see here in the left picture on the left side, on the bottom, you can see there's a horn coming here. You see the 7 horns just like Daniel described. And then there's room for this other horn. I don't know if you can make it out here. He's even got a face on it. And this guy here is actually talked about in the book of Daniel. He's actually a horn that represents the future Antichrist to come. Well, it's interesting that in the book of Joshua, not only do you have the 7 horns, the 7 nations which Joshua delivered them from, but there was a guy by the name of Adonizedek, which means the Lord of righteousness. And he was the one who got all the rest of these nations to follow him in a coalition. In fact, what does Antichrist do at the end? At the end of the book of Revelation, he forms a coalition to go fight Jesus when he comes. That's right. That's the last thing the Antichrist does, is he moves the world and their armies to try to prevent Jesus from taking over the world. And you see it here introduced by Joshua. And so this, this concept, it prevails through the book of Joshua, and you can see its relevance to biblical prophecy. And so here, picture on the left, you can see that where the 3 horns were uprooted. Daniel 7, 8 says here 3 horns uprooted. And I mentioned Adonizedek means Lord of righteousness. This is an actual person in the book of Joshua, and now we're going to read about him. Joshua chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. So in verse 3 it says, "Wherefore Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem," king of Jerusalem. They don't have Jerusalem yet. This king's sitting on it. By the way, Jerusalem means peace. So he's the king of peace. What does Antichrist do? He comes in first peaceably, right? Maybe the peace treaty. He makes a peace treaty for 42 months. So anyway, the king of the peace treaty, you could say, or the king of peace, sent unto Hoham, king of Hebron, and unto Piram, the king of Jarmuth, and unto Japhia, king of Lachish, and unto Dibber, king of Eglon, saying, "Come up unto me and help me, that we may smite Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the children of Israel." That peace that they made, with Joshua made with the Gibeonites, by the way, that was through deception. And what's the Antichrist going to do with his peace? He's going to deceive Israel into accepting that peace, right? And verse 5 says, "Therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, the king of Eglon, gathered themselves together and went up, and they and all their hosts encamped before Gibeon and made war against it." Of course, the Gibeons just cried out to Joshua, said, now Joshua had a covenant now with the Gibeons, and so they cried out to him to save them. And he did. But you can see this coalition. Now, I'm not saying it's exactly what we read in prophecy to come. It's a pattern. Remember I said prophecy is patterns, cyclical patterns that God continues to develop. But this is where he lays it out in the beginning. And we see the first time he laid it out was in the book of Genesis, right, with the 10 horns. But here now we have a rising of a Antichrist type figure who has these nations bond together with him to make war against Joshua, who's coming in to give the people the inheritance, who represents Jesus. Oh, look at this. Remember in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, when they said this, "And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight"? In other words, when the people tried to take that land in the day of Moses, they were terrified at these same people that Joshua went in and said, "We can do it." And look at when you actually see the picture. This is a terrifying picture. And there were 7 heads on this terrifying picture when they went in the first time. They saw the Girgashuites and the Canaanites and the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Hivites. They saw it. And they were terrified. And it's the same concept. Because when the Antichrist actually finally rises in the last days, remember the scripture says, they will say, "Who is like the beast and who could fight against it?" It's kind of like saying, in our own sight, we're like grasshoppers. We can't fight this thing. Better than fight it, why not escape? Why not be in the rapture? So you don't have to face this in the latter days. But isn't this beautiful, how this prophecy is in that book of Joshua? Oh, you can see on the right-hand corner, you can see the captain of the host there, the picture of the captain of the host in front of Joshua. Because, yeah, there's no way Joshua could take this thing down. It had to be the captain of the Lord's host and him alone. And he gave him the strategy. He gave him the plan. And you know how they beat him? They beat him based upon the plan. How are we victorious? We are victorious because we're in the Word. Those who escape in the rapture, you go back, if you want to look at the YouTube, or just go back and read the 7 churches and the admonition to the 7 churches. The ones who are rewarded in the rapture are the ones who love the Word. Look at the walls around ancient Jericho. There was not only the outside wall, there was the inside wall. Could you see the city was impregnable? There's no way Joshua was going to take this city down. That's ancient Jericho. And here on the right-hand side, you can see a lot of pictures here. We know today, because of archaeology, we know that the main god that was worshipped in Jericho was Baal or Baal. I've heard it pronounced either way. I believe the correct pronunciation is Baal. But, you know, I said over and over myself, Baal, because to me it looked like Baal. But you know what? Today the major enemy is the same, because Baal's symbol was the moon. He was the moon god. And Islam, you see the crescent moon everywhere. Islam's crescent moon in the star symbol is the identical symbol of ancient Baal worship. In other words, the enemy, the God, is still the same one in the days of Jericho, in the days of Joshua. That was the one that was behind it all. And that's Islam. And Muhammad turned it into a new, different religion. It's kind of like the same old religion with different clothes. And these people are so deceived, they have no idea that they're worshiping Baal. But look in Joshua chapter 2, verse 1 through 4. We have another parallel about the book of Revelation. Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, "Go view the land, even Jericho." And they went. They came into a harlot's house named Rahab, and they lodged there. It was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country." And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, "Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country." And the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, "There came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were." You see what she did? Why did she hide them? Well, she told them why. Because she believed. First she told everyone in the city is terrified of you coming. There was many people that believed that that Joshua was going to tear down those walls. They believed they were going to be invaded by these 12 tribes of Israel. They heard what their God had done in the fleeing from the Egyptians. There were stories. They told stories of it for the last 40 years. They didn't understand why they stopped coming. They didn't know why. But a lot of them were terrified. But Rahab had guts. Rahab had faith. Rahab reasoned this: I have nothing to offer God. I'm a harlot. But this I have. I believe if I throw myself down at the mercy of God, because I believe that God, that's the God of the universe, that God has to have mercy on me. What can I do? I'm casting everything. I'm helping I'm helping out Israel. I'm helping out the spies. I'm helping out the enemy because I know that these are the people of God. And God has given them the city. How many other people, I wonder how many other people in that city could have done the same thing? One woman's faith saved not only her and whoever was in her house. That's tremendous. This woman, she wasn't an Israelite. You know, this woman, Rahab, by the way, was a great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of who? Jesus. She's in the genealogy. In other words, without Rahab, there wouldn't have been a Jesus. So a good thing God let her in, right? She was right in the middle of that bloodstream. And the story continues. Joshua had said unto the two men that had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house and bring out thence the woman and all that she hath. And you swore unto her. You can see in the left-hand picture at the top, you can see him escaping from the window down the wall. Remember, she helped him. She not only hid them, but then she helped them escape. And they told her if she would hang the red cord in her window, that when they came, they would deliver her and everyone in her house. And it's the same promise Jesus made to us. He said, I will deliver you, not only you, I will deliver everyone in your house. Through the blood of Jesus. And that red cord is the blood of Jesus. Right. Or represent the blood of, but it's by faith, right? But if the people didn't stay in the house, they weren't obligated to go search them out in the city. You know, it's kind of like in the days of Lot, where he said, get out and don't look back. And she looked back. Remember, the wife looked back. Was turned into a pillar of salt. Many people scoff at that. The professors, they're so smart, they know better than the rest of us. Oh, how could that happen? How could somebody actually turn into a pillar of salt? I believe it happened. So you notice that basically the gospel promise was made to Rahab, just like in the days of Egypt, where they put the blood on the house. They said, whoever's in the house, the death angel won't come in, right? It's the same thing. To Rahab, whoever is in your house will be spared. Now, of course, they were talking, when they said your house, they were talking about her family, right? But you know, when she told her family and her relatives, you know there are a lot of people related because they're all in that same city. So she probably had a lot of relatives. And she was trying to get everybody, as many people saved as she could. All you got to do is be in my house. They're going to spare us. I suspect, we're not told how many there were. I don't believe we are. I don't think it says how many. But I suspect that her house had plenty extra room. I suspect that a lot of her family didn't show up. I suspect that they were telling other people. I suspect the word went through the whole city. They knew it. They knew they were coming, and I suspect the word went through the whole city that people in Rahab's house are going to be delivered. And there were probably, I'm thinking on this. I don't know if this is right or not, but I'm thinking that there was a boy or a young man by the name of Ron who said, Rahab has a promise. And I know I'm not related to her, but I believe that's God. And I go and Ron says to this woman, he says, do you mind? I see that there's room in your house, and I know the people are going to be delivered. Do you mind if I come into the doors? And Rahab says, well, it was supposed to be for my family, but a lot of my family just haven't come. So there's plenty of room. Come on in. And Ron was delivered. And Gail heard the same thing, and she came in. She came into the house. But there are thousands of others who ignored it. Thousands in that city ignored that they could be delivered. Besides that, what's to stop people from running out of the city before the destruction and running to Joshua and throwing themselves down and begging, saying, we know you're going to deliver Rahab. We beg you. We will serve your God and your people forever and ever and ever. Just spare our lives and our children. I think if they would have pleaded, I think God would have said, spare them. What do you think? It sounds to me like my God. Anyway, I can't prove that to you. But anyway, these two men, you can see them coming down the wall. In verse 23, and the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren. And look at this, all that she had. All that she had in that house. Just like Noah, God saved everyone that was in the ark. It's just nobody came. Except for his family. They wouldn't listen. And sometimes we, as Christians, we say we have a promise. Our children and our family, our relatives, they're going to hear the gospel, they're going to come in, but sometimes they have their free will. And there's nothing you can't tie them up in the basement. You go to prison for that. I guess you could, but all that were in the house, all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred and left them without the camp of Israel. In other words, they can't be in the camp of Israel because they're not Israelites. They were like second-class citizens. But you know what? Second-class citizens are better than dead. Have you ever heard that? In fact, Solomon says this in Ecclesiastes, I believe it is. He says a live dog is better than a dead lion. That's true. I'd rather be a live dog than a dead lion. And they burnt the city with fire and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and of iron they put in the treasury of the house of the Lord. Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive in her father's household, all that she had, and she dwelleth in Israel even to this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Where it says even she dwells in Israel even to this day. Obviously, that's when the book was written. It doesn't mean she lives in Israel today. Okay? She's dead. But we know she's in heaven. Right? We know she was she was of faith. And look at this. Did you notice I'm sure you caught on the pattern. Joshua sent his two witnesses. He sent his two witnesses, right? And why did he send it? He sent his two witnesses, not so much, I don't think, to spy out the land. I think God told him send those two witnesses because God was going to save Rahab. And that's why the two witnesses are coming in book of Revelation. That's why they're coming, because there's one last effort to try to save some. And we get that from Revelation chapter 11 through 3 through 5. And I will give power. And you can see the two witnesses on the right-hand side. You can see the fire coming out of them. And you can devour their enemies. It says, I will give my power to my two witnesses. They shall prophesy 1,260 days. It's 1,260 days. 42 months, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceeds out of their mouth, devours their enemies. If any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. So you can see the parallel, once again, Joshua in the book of Revelation, right? And here's Joshua chapter 6, verse 4 through 5. And it talks about those walls that are going to crumble and those 7 trumpets that are going to be blown. And that's really why we're here in the first place, because we're looking at the 7 trumpets, in case you forgot, in Revelation. But that's how we got here. And look what it says here. And the 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day you shall surround or compass the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow with the trumpets, and it shall come to pass. And when they shall make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout. And the wall of the city shall fall down flat. And the people shall ascend up, every man straight before him. And Joshua had commanded the people, saying, You shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day I bid you to shout, then you shall shout. And it was very important that they followed the directions. And when Jesus was here for 3.5 years, He gave us directions. And I don't believe it's any less important for us not to follow His directions. But so many of us think, I'm saved, I don't need the directions. I think you might be hanging on to false security. Maybe you should read what Jesus said and His apostles. But look how beautifully this ties in, because Joshua says, don't make a sound until I tell you. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1, look at this. Right before the trumpets. And when He had opened the 7th seal, there was silence. Right before the blowing of the trumpets, there's silence in heaven. About the space of a half hour. And then the trumpets are going to be blown. Because the walls are going to fall. When the trumpets start being blown, that's the end. The trumpets are 2 things. They're for warnings and they're for judgment. There's something else here that's interesting in Luke 21:25. And actually you can look at Revelation chapter 6 where it talks about the 6th seal. It talks about signs in the heavens as well. But in Luke chapter 21:25 it says, There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity of the sea and the waves of roaring. Look at this most wonderful miracle in the book of Joshua. It's almost like you don't see anything like this. This is greater than the parting of the water. I mean, this is almost unbelievable, even for me. But I believe it. Why? Because God said it. You know, if you can believe this, you're doing pretty good. Because most people don't believe this is possible. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. He said in the sight of Israel's sun, He looked at the sun. Remember Jesus looked at the winds and he said, Peace, be still. Joshua looked at the sun and said, Sun, stand thou still. Wow. He commanded the sun not to move. Now we know that the earth actually moves, right? It gives the appearance that the sun is moving. But the earth, the scientists tell the earth has to move or there wouldn't be no gravity. What they'll argue is that if the earth stopped moving and we'd all fall off. But obviously that's not true. I don't care if God has to send those billions and billions of angels to hold everybody on earth. God can do anything. And Joshua didn't have the power. Joshua just spoke. He said, Sun, stand still. Did you know that we're supposed to take our faith and our authority and speak to our problems in the same way? You say, Satan, stand still. We're supposed to speak to the problem and speak the answer. And leave it up to the angels of God to do it. Easier said than done, I realize. And the sun stood still, and the moon, the sun stands still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? That's not in the Bible. So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, hasted not to go down about a whole day, and there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Well, of course, this is before the New Testament was written. This is before Elijah walked on the earth, right? But this is some major, fantastic stuff. You can the picture almost seems like Joshua's just holding the sun. Now, obviously, that's not what happened, but the Scripture does say he looked at the sun and I believe he pointed at it and said, "Sun, stand still." And it obeyed. Pastor, I don't understand how that happened. It doesn't resonate up here in my brain. But I don't need to understand it to believe that God did it. You know what? If it says it, I believe it. That settles it. You heard that before? God said it. I believe it. That settles it. And I think that's the attitude we need to have. In Joshua chapter 6, verse 4 through 5, this is important about these trumpets. Watch this. And the seven priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets. We have the 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. Before the ark of the 7 trumpets of the ram's horns, and the 7th day you shall compass the city. How many times? 7 times. Let's read it again. 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of the ram horns, and the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets, and it shall come to pass when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat. The people shall ascend up every man straight before them. Anytime you see pictures, it looks like the city walls are crumbling. But the Bible says they fell flat. In other words, they fell in. And that allowed the armies to walk up the walls and right into the city. There was no debris. They used it like a platform to get in there. But here's something that misses. I got it in green there. This misses the average person when they go through it because they don't know what 7 times means. But see, it says this: you're going to do this 7 times. Now remember that inference about the ark where it said you're going to be about 2,000 cubits in front of you. In other words, there's going to be about 2,000 years between you and Christ. Now this says about these trumpets that there's going to be 7 times. Now these 7 trumpets talk about those 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation as well. Is there a connection with the 7 times? Oh, look at this. It just so happens there's this thing called the mystery of the 7 times. Now I didn't just pull that out of my pocket here. Well, what is meant by prophetic times? The mystery of the 7 times are prophetic 7 times. If you're familiar with the book of Daniel, in chapter 4, 22, verses 23, this is where the 7 times comes from. Now this is actually important because in Hebrew, by the way, the word times, it doesn't say 7 times. It's 7. The 7 times actually is the same wording as 7 years. This 7 times is found here in this scripture. And it says, "It is thou," in verse 22, chapter 4, verses 22, "It is thou, O king, that thou art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown, reaches unto the heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him." The 7 times is the same wording as 7 years. So it's just like when it says 7 years or 7 times, it's the same thing. And we get from the scripture, there's other prophecy that says 1 day with the Lord is like a 1,000 years, and 1,000 years 1 day. There's other scripture that says that God says 1 day, 1 prophetic day equals 1 year. Okay, in the Bible. There's scripture for that. So let's go. So this 7 times. What is that? What is he talking about? And I'll show you the next. And I know this is confusing, especially if you heard it for the first time. So going to Daniel. Daniel was told that in 606 BC, Nebuchadnezzar becomes the king, head of gold on the image. The biblical year is 360. We get that from the book of Revelation because 42 months is considered to be 1,260 days, right? The tribulation period is for how long? For 7 years, right? Actually, tribulation itself is 3.5 years, but there's 3.5 years. There's this whole thing called the last week of Daniel. But anyway, you have 7 times 1 year. When he says 7 times 1 year, or 7 years, is what Nebuchadnezzar was told. But the 7 times prophetically is 360 years, because each year is 360 days. Okay, so if this is kind of foggy, that's okay. I mean, you probably could find many things on this subject if you want to dig deeper into it. But the way the calculation comes up, 360 years times 7 equals 2,520 biblical years. If you take the 2,520 years, actually. It says solar here, but the solar is wrong. It's actually lunar. Because 360 days in a year is actually a lunar year, not a solar year. But so it's 2,520 years. Subtract the 606 years, and you come up with 1914. 1914 is when World War I hit. Is Joshua saying, when he talks about the 7 times, is he also talking about this same 7-time period, which Daniel was saying that the vision that Daniel saw would begin to continue? In other words, the rising of the Antichrist kingdom would come after 2,520 years, which is exactly the same year that World War I began. This is one of the central doctrine in prophecy. So is he talking about the same thing? That would mean that those 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation and the judgment to fall can't happen for 2,520 years. In other words, those 7 trumpets could never have been fulfilled before these 2,520 years had passed. Which brings us to 1914, World War I. We see World War I began on 28 July 1914 and lasted until 11 November 1918. There's also this concept, if you've never heard of this, it's pretty important, and I know we haven't taught on this. It is on, I actually got 2 messages on YouTube called the 70th week of Daniel. They may not be called exactly that. Maybe it says 70 days are decreed or something like that. But there's actually 2. The one that's the video, that's older than the audio one. So I would recommend if you listen to it, you listen to the audio one that's on there, because it's much more recent and obvious, and it's also much more clear. The recording is much better. But so you can, you don't have to wait for me to cover it here. You could actually get into it. But anyway, this comes from Daniel also. This is crucial, because this is where the whole concept of the last year of the tribulation, where do we get that 7-year tribulation from? It actually comes from the 70th week of Daniel concept. And I mention it here because this whole thing of Joshua seems to tie in prophetically with all this. Anyway, in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, we read, 70 weeks are determined upon the people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Look at all the things that are going to happen during this time. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. So this is a prophecy that tells us exactly when Jesus is going to be crucified. And that's the reason this message out there on YouTube is so important, because what it does, it takes you through the calculations so you can follow the whole pattern here and see that it takes you back to find out, well, we see where it says in verse 25, know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah. It shows you Scripture. Where was this pulled from? When did it happen? You can run the calcs. Anyway, just to make it short and simple, this one prophecy tells us the exact year Jesus Christ was crucified. There was no reason for the Jews to miss that this was the Messiah. And if you listen to that audio on YouTube, you'll see where we get all that from. But see where it says here, after three scores, King James way of saying 60, right? So after 60 and 2 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Those are prophetic weeks. Those are not 62 weeks, but prophetic weeks. Shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city, that's the Romans, and the sanctuary. And they did. Remember, they destroyed the temple in 70 A.D. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week, he is talking about the Antichrist. This is that final week, because he says 70 weeks are determined, but he only talks about the 69 weeks. And so that's where we get the last week, which is 7 years, in that 7-year tribulation period. So you have a lot of homework to do, or just go and listen to that audio to get this information. But anyway, he shall confirm the Antichrist shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Remember, he makes a peace treaty of some sort and a covenant. And in the middle of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and then the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Because what does Antichrist do in the middle of that tribulation? After he made that covenant, he breaks the covenant of peace. He goes in, he terrorizes and kills, murders, rapes the people that are living there in Jerusalem. And he goes into the temple and he defiles the temple, and he sets up his headquarters there in a Jewish temple that was just rebuilt in the days of Elijah. Remember, first he goes into Jerusalem. What does he do? He kills Elijah and Enoch. Of course, they rise 3.5 years later. That all comes from Revelation chapter 11. I know I'm putting a lot on here, but I wanted to bring up the concept of the 70th week of Daniel without going into all the details. And maybe we'll get to do that at some point, really go through it. But like I said, it's out there on YouTube if you want to listen to it. Anyway, that's where it all comes from. And I bring it up because I believe it has relevance, because just like we said the 7 times, it's the same thing here where it talks about 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It's in the midst of a week. This is all prophecy and calculations that would need to be done. If you didn't get that part and understand it, that's okay. A lot of this stuff you don't get the first time through. And this slide here comes from Revelation chapter 11, verse 3 and 7. We introduce this whole idea about these 2 witnesses. You see here, and I will give power unto my 2 witnesses. They shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. That's 1/2 of the 7 years. So those 2 witnesses will prophesy for 42 months. And then, verse 7, chapter 11, Revelation says, and when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them. Why is this all important? Because that 7th trumpet does not blow until after these 2 witnesses are killed. So remember, we said it spanned 3.5 chapters of Revelation, just those 7 trumpets. On the right-hand side, we have this thing called exposing Antichrist. Those eyes look kind of evil. And they worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great blasphemies. Great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue for 42 months. That 42 months is after he kills those 2 witnesses. See, all hell does not break out the first 42 months of the 7 years. It's only until the last part of the 7 years where Antichrist is actually revealed, and then all hell breaks loose. I mean, the first part's bad too, and we'll see some of that as we go, in other lessons and stuff. I want to bring something up about this harlot, because I think this is prophetic coming out of the book of Joshua. But let's read this from Joshua chapter 6, 22, verse 25. But Joshua said unto the 2 men that have spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house and bring out thence the woman and all that she has, as you swore unto her. And Joshua saved Rahab, the harlot, alive in her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelleth in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. The scripture very clearly says if you are having anything to do with the false religious system, you're to come out from among them. And the scripture clearly says if you're not in the rapture, then basically you're in that system. You're going into the tribulation. But here's the wonderful thing I see coming out of the book of Joshua. Joshua sent those 2 witnesses there for the purpose to minister to save the harlot in her house. And so the people that are left in the tribulation, the reason the 2 witnesses are coming is to give one last plea to those that are part of the harlot. Come out, part of Babylon. Come out from her and be no longer partakers of her sins, and God will still have mercy and will still save them. And that's what He wants. Just like He saved Rahab and everyone in her house. In other words, what this is saying is anyone that missed the rapture, in the church, God is calling them saying, it's not over yet. You can still come out. And He's calling for their repentance and for them to take a stand at the time. But God was showing me some more interesting things. I'm not going to get into it today, except for I can tell you that what's going to be is going to be really difficult for these people in the tribulation. Very difficult for them to come out. And so I was seeing some new stuff just even today. I wanted to bring this up just as a tail end. We talked about last year, actually in September of last year, we talked about the blood moons. Now, how many have heard about the blood moons? How many, either from here? Many people may have heard from here, or for other people talk about it. And it was almost a year ago. And so we're thinking, because here's the attitude out there. If you go on the internet, you can read something like this. Well, they said that the blood moons was coming, and nothing ever came of it. It's only been a few months. And besides, don't tell me nothing didn't come of it. Right about that same time was that Iranian deal. This country is falling apart. The world situation is dire. Don't tell me nothing came of this, because these blood moons were significant. I can guarantee you these were significant prophetically. Something is still on the horizon, and we may not see it until the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Trumpets this year. Remember, it was the Feast of Trumpets when we saw the blood moon. Well, maybe it doesn't have its effect until the Feast of Trumpets, the full effect until then. Incidentally, I personally believe, this is my personal belief, I can't prove this to you, but I believe just like Jesus was crucified on Passover, He was raised from the dead on first fruits. He was sinless, just like the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The church received the baptism of the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit and the speaking in tongues on the Feast of Pentecost. The next feast day is the Feast of Trumpets that we're looking for. And I believe that we should we can expect, this is my own personal belief, we can expect that the rapture is going to happen in the Feast of Trumpets. I don't know that it's going to be this year. I can't tell you it's going to be this year. But I believe that it's going to happen on one of those feast days, just like Pentecost happened on Pentecost, and Passover happened on Passover. I believe the rapture is going to happen on the Feast of Trumpets. But I'm going to go through just here at the end of this now, and we're just going to remind ourselves about these blood moons, because we don't want to forget what this was all about. So what we have here is the symbol there. We see the sun eclipse up there. We see the blood moon here. We see the earth. We see up there in the right-hand corner, we see Jesus coming in glory, riding on his white steed. And the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verse 24 through 46 says, "But in those days the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give its light, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of glory with power and great glory." This is going to happen, folks. It's going to happen. How many believe it's going to happen? We just don't know exactly when. But I think that's why he gave those blood moons out there. And this is the same reason he gave those trumpets out there. The trumpets are a warning. When cosmic things start happening, it's kind of too late. But they're out there as warnings. All of these signs are warnings to people that it's coming. And these blood moons have historically been warnings. And the last one, this one that happened last year, this is the last one. It's the last one supposed to happen for 600 years. So we know it's got to be significant just there. Remember we talked about the number 7, how God, it's a perfect number? 7 blood moons happened before the last one. The last one is the 8th. In a week you have, every 8th you start a new beginning. You have 7 and then you have a new beginning. The last blood moon signified there's going to be a new beginning. When is it going to happen? I believe that was a warning. It's warning to the world. Just like, see, it could have happened last year when we talked about it. But it's an extension of grace by the world. Just like when Noah went into the ark, but the door wasn't shut yet. God waited a week before he closed the door. People could have come. And God's grace has waited for people. But the time is coming. Anyone that believes in prophecy, you've got to realize how close we are. But I think for the most people that are in the church and that might have heard it, and I think for the most of them they've forgotten about it now. They say, well, nothing ever came of it. But it's coming. This one reason this last blood moon was so important. See, that when we say blood moon, the only things that are significant are called a tetrad. There's 4 blood moons in 1 year. And they have to happen on Israeli feast days. And so you'll see that they did 4 blood moons in a row on these Israeli feast days. And this one's significant because there was a solar eclipse right in the middle. And what that represents, we brought this out before, it's a menorah. It was not only the blood moon tetrad, but this is the final one. Remember, this generation shall not pass away, right? It's the final one. He puts a solar eclipse right in the middle of it. On March 20th, 2015. That makes it significant. Here are the 8 tetrads after the crucifixion. In other words, over the last 2,000 years, there's only been 8 of these. Now, we're not saying there's only been 8 blood moons. There's only been 8 blood moon tetrads. And the next one doesn't happen for 550, 600 years. So we know 8 is it. Unless you really believe that we're going to still be on earth here for another 500 years, which I don't. But let's look at these. The first one was in 162 AD, 163 AD, in the time of Marcus Aurelius. What was happening at that time? Remember, there was a period of 10 consecutive times which were prophesied in the book of Revelation where the church would be excessively persecuted and tormented in the amphitheaters and eaten by wild animals and the such. That literally happened, and there was a blood moon, blood moon tetrad at that time. It was the first one. Next one happened in 795, 796 AD when Charlemagne became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire actually is a fulfillment in Daniel where you have those 10 horns and then one comes up in the middle. That is the Holy Roman Empire rising up. That's a fulfillment of it. And we actually went through that in some of our previous messages. So that was a warning to the world. That wasn't a good thing. The Holy Roman Empire was not a good thing. There was nothing really Christian about it. Then you had here in 842 and 843, you had the next blood moon. This is when the Muslims actually sacked Rome. And the Muslims have to play an important part in this whole scenario. We didn't see it all the way back at that time, but God flagged it with the blood moons, that this was significant for prophecy. And we can see today how much impact the Muslims are having. But this was when Rome was sacked by the invading Muslims. 23 August of 846 AD. In 860, 861 was the next tetrad. And this was the next wave of the Muslim attack. Arabs and the Byzantines. There was martyrs in Cordoba. Christians were brutally executed under Sharia law. And of course that signified a time, once again, a second time of this invasion by the Muslim forces. Now, all the way through this time, Israel was destroyed in 70 AD, right? So these were like signs prophetically to the church, because Israel wasn't there. In 1493, 1494, the Queen and King of Spain ordered 200,000 Jews, which were all the Jews in that country, to leave. Of course, they didn't have anywhere to go. But what's significant, two things are significant upon this. We know Christopher Columbus came out at that time. Christopher Columbus, a lot of people thought that they didn't know what, they say he was trying to find India. Well, that's not what he was trying to do. He was actually, now they've actually found out by going through his diary and stuff, they've actually concluded that Christopher Columbus was actually a Jew himself. He hid the fact. But they see these things that are written in his diary that shows that he was actually Jewish. And in his diary, they've come to the conclusion, or some have come to the conclusion, that Christopher Columbus was trying to find a new homeland for the Jews. And so he got Spain to pay for it. He believed the world was round and that there was a continent over there. There was a new promised land for the Jews. There had to be, because God promised that He was going to move them or lead them into the promised land. Little did Christopher Columbus know that the Holy Spirit was raising him up to find the United States of America. The United States of America is actually significant in this world time scenario. But if it wasn't for our help, Israel would have been not as well off, right? In the whole strategic plan. But Christopher Columbus was actually looking because he believed that the Jews were supposed to have their own homeland. And that's what all that was about. And there was a blood moon tetrad to signify that a time change had happened. There was a new emphasis upon the Jewish people returning to their homeland. The next blood moon comes in 1949 and 1950. This was when Israel becomes a nation. Israel's back as a whole in their homeland. And there was a blood moon that happened right about that same time. Israel becomes a nation, and they signed a peace armistice with Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. What is that? That's all the surrounding areas. Egypt, Jordan, up there way north, Lebanon, and on the right, Syria. All of their neighbors signed a peace treaty with them. And they become a nation. As soon as they signed the peace treaty, they started war with them again. Maybe this is coincidental. The blood moon's happening the same time Israel becomes a nation. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Well, let's see. When is the next blood moon? The next blood moon happened in 1967, 1968, when Israel gained land from Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and Jerusalem became the capital of Israel. And prophecy dictated Jerusalem had to be taken in conquest by Israel so the temple could be rebuilt, so prophecy could be fulfilled, because if there's no Jerusalem and there's no temple, then the Antichrist can't come to the temple and be revealed. And neither can the two witnesses be killed in Jerusalem. And you see how everything depends upon it. But this is marked again. This was the next blood moon tetrad. This was actually the last one before the present. So we had one signifying 1490. We had one signifying when Columbus was trying to find a homeland for the Jews. The next one was when Israel actually becomes a nation. And then the next one was when Israel gets Jerusalem as a capital. And some people are telling us this is not significant. And yet there's only one more. That last one happened last year. It ended 28 September 2015. And you can see it, and it had the eclipse. And it not only had an eclipse right in the middle, right on the Feast of Trumpets. And remember, Feast of Trumpets is when the rapture, I believe the rapture is supposed to occur. And there was the eclipse there. But there was also this eclipse right in the middle on the Jewish New Year. So it was not only a menorah, but it was also a special eclipse having to do with the Feast of Trumpets. And that's the last blood moon sign we're going to have before Jesus comes. There's only 8 of them. We've had all 8. And we remember when we first started talking about this blood moon, we had the scripture from Luke where it talked about there's going to be signs in the heavens. He even talks about a blood moon. It says the moon will be turned to blood. And so there again, you have this same thing. You have with the eclipse in the middle, solar eclipse with the blood moon tetrad. You see where you have the menorah in this last blood moon tetrad that happened last September. But let's not forget that this happened. This has already been fulfilled. Well, why didn't the end happen? Because God put this out here for a warning to people. But because nothing happened immediately, they're scoffing. There's going to be some scoffing after we're gone. There's going to be a whole load of people that don't believe that we were raptured up. And the New Age teaches that God's just going to take us out because we're resisting the coming of the new religion. So God's got to do something. He's got to kill us. So that's why we're gone. Some people are going to say that there was an alien abduction. Well, there's a lot of people who rather believe in an alien abduction than a rapture. There's going to be all kinds of stories to explain it. And this is basically the same thing. We only added some of the feast days down there underneath. And I said this when we talked about before. God, we don't have to worry about Israel. It's all in the place. God will take care of Israel, right? We just got through seeing before about the 144,000 sealed, right? We know God is able to protect His own. In fact, that's what that whole Egyptian, when they were in Egypt, that's what that was all about, to show that God could preserve them through all those plagues. At that time, I spoke on this at the time. I said, but what happens to America after the Iran deal? And we haven't seen the full repercussions of that yet. Besides that, we have the Russia rising up against us. We have China rising up against us. The Saudis don't like us anymore. Everybody hates us. But we're not such a good country anyway. We're not a Christian country anymore. I don't know if you think we are, but... And then this was very interesting because this happened a week before the blood moon. And this was, a lot of Catholics were horrified. Because here's this new pope. You know, did you know a lot of Catholics don't accept this new pope? They believe he's an apostate. But anyway, Pope Francis was quoted telling the White House guests that the Koran and the spiritual teachings contained therein are just as valid as the Holy Bible, should therefore be respected as such. And here's the quote: Jesus Christ, Jehovah, Allah, these are all names employed to describe an entity that is distinctly the same across the world. That meeting happened 1 week before the blood moon last year. On Wednesday, September 23rd, actually 5 days before, the Bishop of Rome addressed 11,000 ticketed guests on the south lawn of the White House. Pope Francis in the White House says the Koran and the Holy Bible are basically the same. I never would have thought we would have seen a pope take that stand. But see, what's happening is he's being groomed. He's setting himself up as the high priest over all religions. So we have to be accepting of all religions. Because what's going to happen when the true Christian church is raptured up, there's going to be all this emphasis for everyone to conform, and Christianity is going to be torn down. And all of these so-called churches that are not really on fire for God, don't really believe, they know in part, but they don't really believe, they're not really going to go. A lot of them, I believe, just like from what we see in the redemption of, in this, the saving of Rahab, I believe a lot of them will turn during the tribulation. They would probably be martyred. But we see that we see an unprecedented move by the Pope, and it just keeps getting worse. I don't know how much I can take. I'm ready to leave, Pastor. Are you ready to leave?
Amen.
I'm ready to quit here too. I believe that's the last slide. So let's go ahead and we'll just agree. How many want to agree that was the last slide? Okay, we can get out of here. Thank God. But I hope I added that blood moon at the end, and I'm sorry I went a little longer to do that, but I just felt like we were talking about the 7 trumpets and the warning to the world, and how beautifully that fit in with talking about the blood moons, because there's 8 of those. There were 7, I think there was 7 warnings, and then the final one is what it was. Just like in the trumpet, remember he went around, Joshua went around the city 7 times, right? And then on the 7th time, they went around 7 more times. They actually went around 13 times. And then they blew the trumpets, and the walls crumbled. Well, what about, why did God go around 7 times? Did you ever think about, why didn't He just send them out there, go once around, blow the trumpets, the city fall down? He could have done it that way.
Prophecy. I don't think you would have fulfilled the prophecy.
Yeah. Well, it certainly filled the pattern.
Yeah.
And it certainly fits with Book of Revelation. But you know, I'm looking at it from the other side. I'm thinking, in that day, God was doing that as warning to the people. He's saying, the first time He went around Jerusalem or Jericho, Joshua was basically saying, we're coming in, we're destroying the city. And it was like a warning to the people. I'm wondering if the whole city would have come out and begged God for mercy. If they would have just came out of the city, said, we surrender. We want to worship God. We don't want you to kill us. I wonder what would have happened. I don't know. Because God did tell them to go in there and kill them all.
Gomorrah, the same destruction. Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah,
You can find 10.
he said, yes. He said, if you can just find 10. What if there were 10 people? Surely God would have spared them. I mean, 10 people beyond the ones that went to Rahab's house. I don't know. I'm just speculating on it. But I believe that, and also the way, and this is the revelation God gave me about those trumpets many years ago. He pointed me to Joshua, and I saw that Joshua went around 7 times, and then 7 more times, or 6 times and then 7 times. And it's like the Spirit of God said to me, those 7 trumpets in the Revelation are the same way. Now, what? Because when you read the 7 trumpets, you see all this cosmic, cataclysmic things happening, right? But we just read a couple weeks ago where the angels said, hurt not the earth or the trees until we've had a chance to seal the servants of God on their foreheads, right? So if there's these 7 times, then I think that those 7 trumpets happen 7 times at least as a warning. Could be 13, but as a warning to the people before the actual cataclysmic events happen, to give time for the sealing of the 144,000, the sealed of Israel.